So welcome to episode 21 of Level Up, everybody. 60 minutes of Q&A where your questions and votes really do drive the show. Click on the little link for Slido, which is where you can vote up the questions that you would most like answered and, of course, add your own. Look, we're spending today discussing careers, and in this show in particular, we're going to focus on acquiring the skills around change management for ourselves, for our colleagues, for our organisations. It's all about communication, collaboration and facilitation. So what makes a great communicator or facilitator? How do we better embrace those kinds of skills so that we can help colleagues change through doing a better job ourselves of helping them along that journey? So let's jump straight in together and meet our panel. I'm delighted to welcome Tina Hesse, who joins the panel for the first time. Tina does amazing work with children and young people over in Jersey as a mental health support service manager with Mind. She and her colleagues make a tremendous difference to young lives. So welcome, Tina. Great to see you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm Tina and thank you. I'm from Jersey and we do lots of things. I'm very passionate about change and making a difference in young people and families' lives.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Also joining us for the first time is Elke Sanz, who is a leading change practitioner over at 3E, whose mantra is all about to engage, to enthuse and empower clients, teams and individuals. They help organisations achieve better outcomes through professional change management. Delighted to welcome you, Elke.
Thank you very much, Nick. Great introduction. As Nick said, my name is Elke Sanz, Change Management Practitioner. I'm delighted to be here on this panel today alongside my colleagues, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Elke. Next is Ranjit Sidhu. She's a chartered management consultant, an author, a trainer and an assessor whose work across the Europe, Middle East and African region has drawn on her experience of leading people through change across many, many different business cultures. So welcome, Ranjit. Great to see you.
Thanks very much, Nick. Yeah, really happy to be here and very happy to be talking about all things change and communication.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. We're going to switch continents now. Whiz all of the way over to Asia. And from Thailand, welcome Ron Leeman, who has been actually an early adopter of online communities, building understanding around organisational change and transformation. Ron's a regular contributor on LinkedIn and has started his own YouTube channel called The Highway of Change. So hi, welcome Ron.
Thank you very much, Nick. Yes, online communication, online delivery is now my bag. I saw the light probably 6 months before the pandemic started, and my whole business model has now shifted online to do training and trusted advice in change management.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. Now, completing our panel for today from the UK's Rod Willis. He's the director and a co-founder of Assentire, whose research into collaboration and change resistance has informed a whole suite of tools and techniques called Collaboration Everywhere. Welcome, Rod. Great to have you join us today.
Thanks, Nick, and fellow panelists. Having spent the past 10 years exploring collaboration, one of the things that we do is try and bring the insights of what it takes to create high-performing teams and how to use collaboration as a vehicle to achieve something much greater. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And we're going to draw on all of the panel's experiences throughout the show. Now, if you're watching this and you think that you would like to volunteer and join us here as a panelist, then just please mention it in the chat and one of our colleagues will be in touch with you and we'll get you onboarded just as soon as possible. So look, let's jump straight into the questions and hear from our question master for today, who is Ellie Bowett, who is joining us from the Thames Valley. And so Ellie, may we have the first question, please?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Hello, everybody. So the first question is from Kevin in the UK, and Kevin asks, does the panel think it's important I make time for ad hoc conversations with colleagues when trying to manage a busy appointment schedule?
Tina, go ahead.
Yes, definitely. I think there's certainly a place for making time for people and just enabling them to feel heard and valued, because if you don't make time for them, then they might not come to you when they're in struggles or they need some help.
I think it's really important, and it's a tricky thing to be able to balance. Rod, go ahead, and then Elke.
Yes, there's a public report which took place within Ernst & Young, actually, and that's in the public domain. And they explored the importance and the positive impact of casual conversation across the organisation. But of course, it extends when you go into the online domains as well. And that just connecting with another person, showing an interest in the challenges they're facing, can actually significantly enhance how not only those two people may interact, but how they then go about their daily work. So it's extremely important.
Okay, thank you. Elke, and then we'll go to Ranjit.
Okay, I want to build up on what Tina and Rod have said. It is extremely important. We are building relationships all the time with people, and it is important to build trust and being available for people when they need to hear, or even when you need to reach someone. It's good to have that flexibility around your time management.
Okay, thank you, Ranjit. Then Ron.
I was going to say a similar thing to what Rod said, that there's research that's been done to show the high performance teams and what helps them be effective. And a big contributor is the informal communication side of it. And adding to Elke's point and the others, that if we weren't working in the virtual world, in the office, there would be these sort of random accidental conversations that happen anyway. In the virtual world, we've got to make even more of an effort to provide the means to be able to have those, to contribute to those relationships and building trust.
Absolutely, thank you. Last words on this, Ron?
Yeah, sure. I agree with everyone, what everyone said. I think the important thing for me is ad hoc conversations provide a less challenging environment to get information. Yeah, people feel more at ease. They feel more relaxed in an ad hoc conversational type situation rather than in a formal one-to-one feedback. So ad hoc conversations are, I think, very important part of the whole process.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think particularly as you get more out of the roles where you're an individual contributor and more into a situation where your diary is kind of, sitting in more meetings than perhaps doing your own work, then you need to allow for that and, try and protect a little bit of time in the day, so that folks can reach out to you and, get hold of you in that way. And you can also get hold of them and just hang out together. It's a really, really important social dimension in that hierarchy of needs that we all require as part of our working lives. So very good. Thank you very much indeed, panel. Great question from Kevin there to kick us off. Ellie, let's move on then. We'll take the next question, please.
Okay, so Peter from London asks, sometimes bad news needs to be given. Should we wait longer and plan to do this face-to-face, or is it better to just tell people faster online instead?
Ron, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to give you an example. Very quickly, many years ago, I was involved in a project working for a railway infrastructure company in the UK. And they were moving 11 record centres into one centre in the middle of the country in York, and there were going to be redundancies involved. The programme manager had one view about making it, doing a communication for the to say there will be redundancies involved. I had a different view. I said we should do that communication, and he eventually took a third-party advice and said, yes, do it, send out an email. I said, no, I think I would prefer to visit every single record centre and speak to people face-to-face. So bad news, yes, nowadays probably maybe you have to do it online, but in those days it was definitely a face-to-face exercise.
Okay, thank you. And Rod?
Yeah, interesting enough, not dissimilar scenario, but I think there are two components that are helpful to consider. One is the scale, i.e. the number of people that you might need to be talking to. If it's 1 or 2 or potentially 20,000, obviously changes the dynamic involved. But the other component is also location. And depending on the location, the face-to-face can be impractical. For example, if you had someone in America and you're based in Europe, then you now have that issue, are you going to travel all the way to the States? Depending on that person's situation, that in an extreme situation might be viable. But in my own experience, what I found is it's the personal component that's the important bit. Yes, if you can be face-to-face, that's ideal, but the scale may not enable that. So if it's a larger number of people you need to convey problematic news to or bad news to, and depending on how far you can go, I think trying to be present and personal in whatever way that is possible, that might be Zoom, not preferred, but it might be. I would recommend not texts. I've known of some of those situations and they're not very desirable. And I'd recommend not email. At least pick up the telephone and talk to people, even if it's a large number of people on a conference call. It's better than an email or a text, in my view. It's that personal component that if you can bring that into the mix somehow, that will actually benefit everyone involved.
Absolutely. Elke?
Yeah, I completely agree with both Ron and Rod. Do it as personal as possible. There is actually a very recent example of the CEO of Airbnb who had to make 25% of his staff redundant. You can Google it. He made a very personal, a very clear message about the layoffs, the reason behind it, and he showed a huge amount of empathy for the people that were being laid off and provided a lot of support, and also allow those people who actually remained in their jobs to mourn effectively for the colleagues that they were losing from their job. It's a great example on how to do it and how to do it well.
Absolutely. Tina, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I just wanted to agree with what everyone's saying, that idea of staff well-being when you have to look at delivering bad news and doing it compassionately. You can still deliver bad news kindly and recognising that when bad news comes, regardless of what that is, there will be some emotional impact on there somewhere for the people who have got the bad news, but also for colleagues and possibly families, and to put a good support network, I think, is really, really important when bad news, when change, even if it initially that change, we might think it's good as managers, the impact might not always seem so good on others. So just doing it with compassion and kindness, I think, is really important.
It makes complete sense. And when those thoughts around scale, I wanted to just touch on. So sometimes it's good to have a blend of both. Okay, it's good to have an all hands kind of meeting where you can signpost what's going to happen, to those impacted communities, because after that, it will be asynchronous by its nature. If you're going to have a series of meetings which are one-to-one or one-to-few, and you've got a large stakeholder community, it's going to take you time, to get around all of those communities and give them the time and the space that they need in order to be able to, communicate with them directly. So do consider that, and those support networks so vital in order to have everybody on board and primed and ready so that they can help you deliver that information and that news to the intended audience. Thank you very much, panel. Some great thoughts. And Ellie, let's move on, please, and take the next question.
Okay, so this question is from John in Greater Manchester, and he asks, is a facilitator just the same as a change manager?
Okay, is a facilitator just the same as a change manager? Rod, we'll go to you first and then Ron.
It's a great question, and it comes down to the definitions that are being used in sectors. If you go into a purest sense of what is a facilitator and what is a change manager, I think you'll find that although there's some overlap, they are very different disciplines. Are there skills in both? The overlap? Absolutely, and they complement each other. But a facilitator depends on the role they're doing. They may not be explicitly facilitating change. They could be facilitating improvement on what is already in place. So I think to mix the two and to converge them is slightly risky because you may miss the value add of what a change manager can bring and what a facilitator can bring. But do they blend well together? Yes, they are. Yes, they do, but they're not the same.
Okay, thank you, Ron.
I think I put the question back. What's a change manager? What does a change manager do? Part of the role of a change manager is to facilitate, is to collaborate, is to communicate. It's all part of a change manager's responsibilities. So it's not the same. It's part of a change manager's roles and responsibilities.
I think I'd agree with you there. I think change management generally is quite a broad church. You know, it's quite a big umbrella of a whole range of different skills and competencies, tools and techniques and so on. And certainly acquiring good facilitation skills will equip anybody who has that role to be able to perform at a higher level. So facilitation is often at the heart of helping the quiet people at the back of the room get their ideas out. It's at the heart of helping the noisy people understand that, you know, maybe they should listen a wee bit more, and so on and so on. And sometimes it's about, you know, being able to take an example from a totally different context and helping a team work through that example. And then you get that kind of, oh, right, okay, yeah, now I kind of get it moment, as, you know, they can then break through whatever impasse, you know, they were stuck on. So I would say scope and scales are broader for the change manager, but absolutely right. You know, being a great facilitator is a key element of being able to deliver on that mission and vision, if you like. So very good. Great question, by the way. Thank you very much. Ellie, let's move on, please.
Okay. So this is a question that comes from Jeffrey in Amsterdam, and he asks, how do I make online meetings more collaborative? Most people switch off during an online meeting.
Okay, how can we bring online meetings more to life? Tina?
Having taught online and also having to facilitate different meetings online, using the chat can be really, really useful. Using live documents can be really, really useful because it can enable people to actually actively take part and give them tasks whilst those online meetings are occurring, so that it's not just them sitting and listening or switching off the camera. So they're actively doing something, I think, for me, is really important.
Ron, how would you do this?
Well, good question. I've been delivering online now for 2.5, maybe 3 years. And the way I look at it is you be yourself. There is no difference for you there's no reason for you to be any different online than there is for you to be offline. You have to be yourself, and people will recognize that. People will understand, and you know, if you start flinging your arms around and you know, give all funny faces, and you know, even if you start the odd song or whatever while you're delivering something, it's important to be yourself, and that's the way I find the collaboration works, because people buy into that authenticity.
Okay, thank you very much. Ranjit?
I agree in that there are basic concepts that apply whether it's virtual or not virtual. Having people feel safe, comfortable, that there's a sense of trust there. You know, you can have diverse stakeholders with conflicting agendas in the session. So even feeling comfortable with the technology, you might have to do extra sessions with them to get them comfortable with the technology, so that isn't the block, you know, that gets in the way. To ground rules, you know, good old-fashioned contracting with the group up front so that it is safe and that everybody's listening, respecting each other's views. But there's a lot of things like that just helps create that sense of safety that can help with collaboration too.
Really good, thank you. Elke?
Yes, I will add to what everybody has said. You know, turn on your camera, for example, it does help with engagement. Having good virtual etiquette, agree up front how you're going to collaborate. And I would even bring in the role of facilitator here again, is allowing people, the quieter ones, to speak, as well as making sure that the louder ones are there to listen as well. And I mean, I could give an example. I use Miro. It's a collaboration tool. It's not the only one. But I do find that some people find it scary when they first come across the technology. They're not used to how to get on with it. And just giving them, for one, I do give them a heads up. This is the tool I'm going to use. There's a short video you can watch, but also helping people navigating the tool, and just so it's very easy, playful tasks that then they can get a bit more confident in using those.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. I would say, if you can do online, don't forget the icebreaker technique. Way back when, 100 years ago, when I was a very young consultant, it was about 1897, I think it was. One of the things that we always did with new teams and new clients was to try to get to know people, and you'd run a variety of different icebreaker type techniques, with new groups, so that you could start to help people feel comfortable, and they get to know you a little and you would get to know them. And the same is true, I think, in online meetings. I don't know why we still do it. We still schedule meetings that start on the hour and finish 60 minutes later. Not quite sure why we're doing that. Why are we doing that? We don't need to do that anymore. Make the meeting 45 minutes, The first 15 minutes, spend the time hanging out, breaking the ice, do something in a collaboration platform. I have to say, we use a great many. Slido is really good. It's not the only one out there. Things like word clouds, this kind of stuff. How are we feeling today? What's your preferred first drink of the day? Coffee, tea, orange juice, milk, whatever it happens to be, these kinds of things. They're just great ways to engage with people and start helping them to feel a bit more comfortable. And then, of course, you can hear from the quiet folks as well. It's not just the loud ones who are willing to talk out loud and so on. So very good. Thank you very much, panel. Let's press on, Ellie, if we may. I know the questions are beginning to stack up now, so we might need to pick up the pace a wee bit, panel.
Okay, so panel, we have a question from a live viewer who's watching us now, and they would like to know, how do you get noticed when you have to work from home, especially if you're just getting started in an industry?
Okay, so I guess as the inside the organisation get noticed and externally from the organisation. Tina, how would you go about this?
I think it's about really trying to show people your drive and your passion, and I think it comes through in the way you are, and that idea of authenticity, and just showing your innovation and the things that you're creative about. I think can really, it doesn't matter where you are, can even from home can still come across.
Yeah, absolutely right. Volunteering is a great tool to be able to use internally, to build your network. It's super important, even when you're just being onboarded. Talk with your colleagues, talk with your team, talk with your, team leader or manager about, how can you help, where can you help? And that way you will start to build your internal network. Rod, your thoughts?
Yeah, I know of a recent situation. I won't mention the company, but it's really an interesting scenario. They have a very strong onboarding program, but this individual had that same challenge, actually, that's this question is aligned to. And what they did is they asked the question, is there someone I can ask to be my mentor? So they reached out into the organization to say, is there someone that could formally mentor me just for the first 6 months? And it turned out the organization had a mentoring program, but it hadn't got mentioned. Just one of those things in life, right? Anyway, as a result of engaging in the mentoring program with another member of staff, immediately the network started to unfold. So the person, rather than having to sort of push through this envelope of not quite knowing where to go, they actually had sort of some guidance, and therefore they connected much more quickly into the organization. And then they felt part of the organization in a very rapid period of time. So I would always recommend, even if there's not a formal mentoring program, just ask, is there someone who might be prepared to mentor me while I'm getting to know the organisation?
It's a really, really good idea. Thank you very much indeed, panel. Ellie, next question, please.
Okay, great. So we have a question from Gina in London, and Gina asks, can you give some examples of how best to deal with a confrontation with a co-worker?
Okay, dealing with confrontation, I guess it is part of what we do. Tina, go ahead.
For me, it's definitely where that confrontation is concerned, ensuring that you really listen and hear the person who has whatever confrontation or conflict that's going on for you, so that once they feel heard, hopefully then you can begin to collaborate and negotiate and support that individual, so that the confrontation, there's resolutions to be found rather than just confrontation, and that you can find a middle way that suits everyone and that there's good outcomes for all.
Yeah, absolutely right. I think that there's the opportunity here, isn't there, to really listen and to genuinely listen from, the other person's perspective first. Ranjit, your thoughts?
I was just going to say that it's very easy to put it on the other person. It's only human to do that. With all of this, we've got to own our stuff as well, and really come from a place of how might I be contributing to this, and what's that bigger sort of common goal that we can both have to come with genuine intention to resolve the confrontation, basically.
Yeah, thank you, Rod.
It's just a recommendation, actually. There's a lovely book, and its title is From Contempt to Curiosity. And the title sort of captures the point, and reflects, I think, what's being shared by some of the other panelists. So if you're into reading and you would like to explore, it's a really interesting book. It takes a very different angle.
Thanks, Rod. We'll put a link to that in the chat for folks later on. Ron, go ahead.
I think it's about making the first move, to be honest. If you have some kind of confrontation, some kind of disagreement with a co-worker, who's going to make the first move? From my perspective, looking at it from a change manager to a stakeholder position, it would have to be me that makes the first move. And then it's all about building the relationship, building back the relationship, finding out exactly what the problem is, honest and timely communication between both of you, and building up that level of trust back to where probably it used to be.
And Tina, your last thoughts?
Just that idea of kindness. I think, you can't go wrong with a bit of kindness. Even if you don't always agree, you can always agree to disagree, but it can still be done with love and kindness, can't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a very big difference between having a professional disagreement, and dealing with confrontation. Confrontation usually has different energy level, perhaps in most situations, than it might do if it's if it's a disagreement that you can kind of acknowledge and move on. All right, very good. Thank you very much. Ellie, we've got time for one more question, I think, before we move into our kind of focus topic questions.
Okay, great, because we have another question from a live viewer watching us now, and they would like to know, how does the panel feel the COVID crisis has impacted the change management profession?
So how has the COVID crisis impacted the change management profession, Tina?
I think for me, working for a mental health charity, looking at individuals' well-being, their mental health, and giving people a sense back of security when things are really uncertain is really, really important. So when you're looking at change, it's about making sure you've got all those support networks in, and just making sure people are feeling good, and that you're putting the foundation of well-being at the forefront of everything you do, which hopefully will enable change to occur slightly more easily in a time when there's less certainty.
Yeah, certainly true. And I agree with that. I think for us at APMG as a global organisation, we saw the pandemic, unfurl around the world at different times. We have had an office, we still have rather, an office in China. We've got people in Australasia, in Africa, throughout Europe, in India, in North America, and so on. And what you saw were some common threads, that uncertainty drove anxiety, and through that anxiety, people needed, a different degree of contact and help and support, because some of their usual day-to-day situation had been completely turned on its head. Elke, final thoughts on this before we move on?
Yes, I was going to say that I think it also raised the awareness of what change management does. And I think it's even increased the demand for change managers out there.
Excellent. There are some really good points. Thank you both very much. So look, now we're going to change gears a little bit. For those of you who are watching online, this is where we start thinking about the focus topic questions. So if you're on Slido and you're in that event number, you'll see a little tab under general Q&A. Just click on that and that will take you across to our focus topic questions, which are specifically now all about acquiring these skills in collaboration and communication and facilitation. Okay, so jump into there, add in your questions, and don't forget to vote up others, because that is the way in which we prioritize our time together. All right then. So let's move into those questions, if we may, please. So Ellie, what's the first focus topic question?
Okay, so the first question is from Alan, and he would like to know, how do you effectively collaborate and communicate while ensuring people's accountability? Any tips you can give?
Okay, so governance and accountability, whilst we're all communicating and collaborating together. I would say that good governance generally allows people a confidence that they can operate within a framework, you know, and provide them the headroom in which to be able to do all of those things. Tina, is that something that you find? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was really, really similar. And that idea of honesty and transparency with you as managers, and to allow open conversations to occur, I think is really, really important, because it stops people from hiding things. So when people trust you that they can come to you with anything, then it allows them to still be accountable even when things are uncomfortable.
Yeah, very much so. And, you know, there's that kind of racy matrix, isn't there, of responsibility and accountability, and, you know, who should be involved and who should be communicated to. Ranjit, what are your thoughts?
I was just going to add that creating the space and then focusing on, great, we're doing all this collaboration stuff and we're coming, you know, thinking together, evolving solutions together, but then to leave the space to turn it into, okay, what are we taking away from this? Who's going to own that? So what actions are prioritized and who's actually going to own it? Clarity around that will help with accountability as well.
Okay, thank you. Tina, jump back in.
Sorry, I was just going to say that idea of also giving people credit for where it's their what's due, because sometimes, you know, it's really important when you're looking at collaboration that everyone gets given the value for the amount of work that they put in, and it's not just one person, or the whole group gets given some value for the work that they've put in.
Yeah, really, really important to recognise all of those contributions, you know, particularly when you're dealing with, you know, the challenge of uncertainty as well. You know, being recognised, recognition is one of, again, in Maslow's hierarchy, is a super important, you know, element of us coming to work. Ranjit, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, just everything's been covered.
All right, very good. All right, thanks very much indeed. Rod, final remarks on this then, and then we'll move on.
Sure, I just wanted to pick up on the word accountability. It's really interesting how that word is used. And often we talk about, you know, I'm being held accountable for, or someone is holding me accountable for something. The most potent version is I feel I am accountable for, when it's internalized rather than projected. And I think it's helpful to separate that word when you hear it. Is someone saying I am, or I should be, or am I really believing I am? Because that will make a big difference in terms of how you relate to both collaboration and communication, and also, interesting enough, how you relate to conflict management and all those other aspects. So do you truly feel accountable, or has it been imposed on? Quite an interesting thing to be aware of.
Yeah, no, and that's really, really important. And I think generally that's going to be one of my takeaways from this conversation, to really think that through and see if I can live a little bit more of that of that value. if you like, in the work that I do. So very good. Thank you, panel. Ellie, let's move on.
Okay, so a question here then from Susanna. Susanna would like to know, how do you ensure communication is really two-way and an exchange and not just top-down and information sharing? What can be done so that people feel respected and heard?
All right, so that communication is genuinely a two-way street and not just an information stream that we're expecting people to almost to drink from a fire hose, if you like. Ranjit, any thoughts? And then Elke?
Just a recent example of a client I've been working with, they had the problem where people felt that their voices weren't being listened to, and they introduced more mechanisms for not only gathering the input and feedback from people, but then creating a way to feed back to say, this is what we heard you say, this is what we've done, and these were the bits that we didn't do, but this is the reason why. And it really shifted the level of engagement that they're getting from people during this change programme.
Interesting. Elke, and then Ron.
Yeah, I'll add to what Ranjit just said, and it's about creating conversations. So my client I'm working with, they do have mechanisms for people to feedback anonymously. There are top-down communications, but there isn't really a genuine place where people can have those conversations. And my suggestion has been around create those conversations where the leader can talk to not just 1 to 100, but really get into those team meetings to really listen. And also a little bit of that has to do with coaching those leaders and individuals to ensure that they're not there to push their agenda, but that they genuinely listen.
Thank you, Ron.
I think I take this from the leader to stakeholder community perspective. In my experience, I've always found it very difficult to convince leaders that they have a responsibility to actually talk to the impacted stakeholder, regardless of where they sit in the organisation, whether they're middle managers or operational people or whatever. And it is also their responsibility to take their feedback and act on that feedback. And I kind of guess, and again, this is based on my previous experience, that a lot of leaders are not comfortable with that direct communication because they don't really want to hear, sometimes they don't really want to hear the truth, what's really happening in the organisation.
Yeah, it's certainly true that different people have, different styles. One interesting thing that I've noticed is that, quite often people feel quite uncomfortable with an open or extended period of Q&A. They would rather, if they had 40 minutes, they'd rather talk with slides for 35 and then have 5 minutes of Q&A. And in all honesty, just record your presentation, give it to people a week ahead, let them watch it, let them think about it, and then have an hour or 2 hours of Q&A. Much better, all right? And that will give you genuinely, the chance to engage and enthuse and bring your vision, to life with people so that the questions that they have are often the key questions. And the people immediately around you, sometimes they don't always think of all of the unintended consequences of, a new initiative and this kind of thing. Whereas a broader audience, generally, the wisdom of the crowd and all of that can really help. Tina, closing thoughts on this?
Just that idea of understanding what someone's saying and that clarification is really, really important, because when someone tells you something and the way that we look at things through different lenses, actually what the person is saying is how you're understanding it is what they mean, not what you think they mean, I think for me is a really important, especially in real leader interactions and virtually, but understanding is really, really important.
Yeah, and the questioner does talk about this. They're talking about, the physical world as well as the virtual world. And, these kinds of, roundtable conversations where you facilitate, extensive Q&A can be hugely powerful, when they're done well. A little bit nervy, but over time you build up your skills to be able to do it. So great question. Thank you very much indeed for that. Ellie, let's move on, please.
Okay, so we have a question that's been posed by one of our panelists today. So Rod would like to ask his fellow panelists, can collaboration still happen when the organisational culture is toxic?
Okay, all right. Who's going to jump right in and have a go first for us around helping Rod out? And then we will come back to you, Rod, towards the end, okay? Tina and then Ron.
For me, I think any toxic culture can be changed through collaboration. I think it's collaboration that enables you to get rid of the toxicity, that hearing, that listening, that being with people, that building relationships. For me, is how we get rid of some of the toxicity in any sort of organisational culture, and really embedding a culture where people feel valued and heard and that they matter. Can really support, and that for me is through collaboration with managers, with stakeholders, with other agencies, within groups, so from the top down, the bottom up, everywhere, it's really important to use collaboration.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Ron?
I'm going to question the position of what is organisational culture, because there's been some recent research by the Oxford Review, if I'm allowed to mention them, about the fact that the research found that there was no real overall organisational culture, and organisational culture was made up with a lot of different tiles from different aspects of the people's cultures. So home culture, from organisational culture, and from their, when they have friends, when they go out with friends, from that kind of culture. So the collaboration issue is a bit misleading, I think, because, you get collaboration within all those individual tiles or all those individual aspects of culture within an organisation. But, again, what is a toxic culture? Is it the whole company that's toxic, or is it just a part of the company that's toxic? So I'm kind of sort of in the middle about that, the collaboration issue and, the toxic culture, because I don't think a company can have an overall toxic culture.
Okay.
If that makes
All right.
sense.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it certainly does. Very clear. Thank you very much. Rod, you posed the question for the panel. In your experience, is collaboration one of the ways, from Tina's perspective, that you can, begin to heal and build a different outcome?
I would suggest yes, but actually there's a component within it that I think often doesn't get explicitly mentioned, and it's been touched on actually in our call today, but it's about this issue of respect and trust and relationships. So like three components. And when you look at, and I won't go into the definition of the toxicity topic, but I agree there are subcultures in organizations without a doubt. So depending where you frame the question depends on how you might respond. But in any organization, it's a collection of people. People interact differently. What often forms that interaction is their relationship and to what extent the outcomes of trust and respect are formed. And so I think when you start to unpick the question, I'm aware of one particular group, which was a high-performing group in its own right, but it lived in an organization that didn't want the transparency the group represented. So that's an interesting tension. So the group itself is working well, but the politics of the organization didn't really want it to work so well because there was great transparency. So now you get into the complexities of the motives and the desires of multiple people, stakeholder groups across the organization. So my personal belief is collaboration can exist as framed in a toxic organization, but actually it's far more complex than the question suggests. So I actually agree with Ron. The question is slightly misleading because you can take it to detailed. You're welcome. Take it to a detailed level, which is, but in what context? And fundamentally for me, trust, relationship, and respect are the three key things. If we pay attention to those three things, we can develop all three things. We can often contribute in ways that maybe we haven't experienced before for some people.
I think that you're right. And so far as culture is an expression of values and behaviours, we need to be mindful that different people will be perceiving that culture in different ways, and they'll be consuming it at different rates. and the degree of change of it overall will vary depending on a whole range of different factors. So kind of unpacking all of that is quite a tricky thing. If you're in a small business and you all sit together and work together and you're just in one location, it's quite different to the kind of challenge that you face if you are a bit more spread out. And certainly this last couple of years has shown us that we do need to reach out to people and we do need to understand their situation far better. And when we do that, we get greater insight into how to move teams and the whole organisation forward. Tina, briefly, and then Ron, super quick, because we do need to move on. Tina, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to think about that idea of things like toxicity and what you were talking about, all the different levels. But for me, bullying is a really important part of any aspect of a culture that you have to really address and make sure that you are challenging those bullying, those discriminatory behaviours really transparently and from the onset to enable organisational culture to be as nice as possible, really.
Okay, thank you very much. And Ron, last remarks?
Yeah, very, very quickly. I read a very interesting short piece a few months ago where they said, if you want to change culture quickly, you can do. Just forget about it. Just get people to move along the journey to the new ways of working, and culture will deal with itself.
Okay, very good, sound advice. Thank you very much. Ellie, let's move on. I think we can fit in a few more questions. Panel, we need to up the pace though, please. So let's really get on the money.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. We've got a couple of questions that are coming in for live viewers. So this one from Emma is, how would you explain the benefits of having change management certified staff within your organisation?
Okay, so change management certifications, how are they actually going to help and benefit the organisation? Who would like to take that one on first from the panel? So while they're considering that, so I'm going to jump straight in and say that that change management is a blend of art and science. The discipline that learning a particular approach to organisational change is hugely helpful. Remember, it's not just about what the change manager is doing that affects the outcome of the change. That actually change management, if you like, is about preparing the organisation for adopting a particular solution or being able to take advantage or optimize the outcome of a particular set of circumstances. So the more people that you have talking the same language, the more people that you have understanding the process, generally, the better off you are most likely to be. Ranjit, go ahead.
Actually, I was going to say a very similar thing to you. Quite often in organisations, change management isn't something that's valued. It can be seen as a bit, soft and fluffy and intangible. And so to give more credibility to this, to give more credibility to people who are in that role, the certification can be really helpful, along with, as you said, that sort of consistency of language, consistent approach that goes with it. And ultimately, it's going to help realise benefits, of the effort that you're putting into making change happen. So it is valuable.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The realisation of those benefits is down really to how the organisation or the team embraces the change. Ron, final thoughts on this?
Yes, I think my position on certification, Nick. I think certification is a way of saying, yes, I have learned the basics of change management, but for me, you don't really become a real change manager until you've actually dived in at the cold face of change for probably 2 to 3 years. Yeah, but the certification certainly does give you that, opens the door for you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much indeed. So thank you very much, panel. Ellie, let's see if we can't fit at least one more, maybe 2 more questions in if we move at some pace. Go ahead.
Okay, so we have a question from a live viewer watching us on YouTube at the moment, and they would like to know, what advice could you give for building the teams of people working together online?
Okay, so team building in a virtual world. Elke?
I think it applies the same as would do in a face-to-face world. But it's about building those relationships, getting to know people personally as well as professionally, and creating that environment for social interaction, and not just focused on work all the time. Team building, energizers, check-ins, all of these things we sort of mentioned before they apply to building a team.
Yeah, some great advice there. Ranjit, go ahead.
And alongside all of that, I think really just going back to basics as well. Are people's roles clear? Have we got clear processes for how regularly we meet, how we're going to make decisions, how are we going to resolve issues? And talking about that, putting these things in place before there are issues are all helpful.
Rod?
Yeah, I think the people side's been covered fairly well by my fellow panelists. There's one area, though, that I think is worth mentioning. There's a framework called the Stages of Concern. It's a model that was developed, believe it or not, in the late 70s, 80s. Late 70s, 80s. And it was specifically looking at how technology was being adopted within education. If you just search Stages of Concern framework, you'll find material on it. And it's looking at how people interact differently with technology. It's not about being a technologist. It's about, if I'm introducing technology to support online interaction, as an example, do I have any barriers in my relationship with the technology itself? Am I someone that likes the challenge? Am I someone that's intimidated by the challenge? And many graduations within in between. So my suggestion is don't forget the technology learning component, because that can cause some really interesting social responses because of the technology itself, which has nothing to do with the relationship of the people, but is often misinterpreted to be, well, that person's not connecting because of, and people are thinking it's because of a personal relationship rather than a technology relationship. So just watch out for the relationship.
It's a really good point. Is it an enabler or is it a barrier? Tina, last thoughts on this?
Just that idea of doing things with people rather than to them. I think is really, really important, and seeing, having fun with them, finding out what makes them tick, what makes them energized, looking at all those different things to enable working together to see, have people got strengths, not just something they're good at, but what energizes them, what is going to enable them to want to be part of that team.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of building on some of the thoughts that we had earlier, panel, it's one way that you can begin to build in that social dimension is just start those online meetings a little early and have it as a more social time. Everybody doesn't need to arrive within the same 60 seconds. If they are, if they're joining an online meeting, sometimes it's nice to kind of come together and just kind of hang out a little bit before the meeting kind of begins. I think what we're going to do just right now, we're kind of coming up to almost the end of our time and session together. Nigel, if you can do, please can you take us back to the panel view? Thank you very much indeed kind of for that. And Ellie, let's fit in one last question before we wrap up.
Okay, so I have a question from Kerry in Birmingham, and Kerry says she has a nervous team member and is trying to encourage them to participate in meetings. However, when this particular team member answers some questions, their answers aren't always right, and other team members can occasionally be disrespectful. How can she manage this?
Okay, so how do you encourage those folks who are a little bit, nervous to contribute without, this kind of unintended consequence of other folks coming in hard and fast? What are some ideas that we might have kind of around that? Rod, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to think in a supportive way. If we want this person to engage, which sounds like we do, then the question is to help them have the tools to do so in a meaningful way. Now, if they're engaging in a way where they're making statements which turn out to be incorrect, then that's obviously going to impact their self-esteem, impact their relationship with their teammates. So it's actually going to be counterproductive. What might be helpful is to have an offline conversation with this individual and then suggest to them, rather than make their statement of what they believe an answer is to ask a question rather than to give answers. So if that individual can be helped to ask questions comfortably, then that actually encourages their teammates to come and support rather than, sorry, what was said was incorrect. So rather than a challenge, you're soliciting curiosity, actually. So that's what I would suggest.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much, Tina, and then Elke.
For me, just that idea of also pulling out some of the disrespect and supporting those individuals who sometimes might not even realise that they're having an impact on the more nervous members of staff. So, just really, yes, looking at curiosity, but also that kindness, that compassion, that empathy, those active listening skills, all those really important things of relationships and building that sense of trust and ability to make everyone feel valued and welcome within that space. Because like you've talked about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and belonging is definitely one of them. If we want self-esteem, if we want to be able to self-actualize, feeling safe, having those basic needs met is key, isn't it?
Absolutely right. Elke, final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I was going to say very much what Tina just said, and I totally agree about supporting the individual. But even if the individual feels a little bit more confident, if you're still allowing disrespectful behaviour, that's not going to help create that safe environment. So you need to address both.
Yeah, absolutely right. Both in tandem. So good. Look, panel, thank you very much indeed. You've done an absolutely great job of going through it. It's been a fantastic exchange of ideas, and great job to the producers of the show, who of course are everybody online who's been adding their questions and jumping into Slido and voting up the questions for us. So great job to the producers. Thank you very much indeed for everybody who's been doing that on LinkedIn and on YouTube. It's been pretty active, I think, on both platforms today. So we're going to hear some closing remarks now from the panel. So Ranjit, if I may, I'll come to you first and then Rod.
Really, I just want to say if you keep your outcome in mind, come from the right intention in order to achieve your goals and have the interest of the other people in mind as well, then you can't go far wrong with your communication and collaboration.
Thank you very much, Rod, and then Ron.
I've mentioned these 3 words before, but I'll just do it again. I think they're critical. Pay attention to relationships with the intended desire to create trust and respect. If you have those, you're going a long way to being successful.
Thank you very much indeed, Ron, and then Elke.
I'll just use 3 words, if I may: openness, honesty, and transparency.
Okay, very good. Thank you very much. Elke, your closing remarks on today's session?
So collaboration, communication, facilitation, there are all key skills that a change manager needs to have. But as you said earlier in the session, change management is very broad, and there's a lot of other skills that we bring to the table.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Tina, and then we'll hear from Ellie.
So for me, that idea of collaboration and communication definitely boils down to respect and kindness and all of those key things that we need to do as a human being from one to another, and really establish staff well-being as a foundation to work from. And then I think you can grow anything, and you can do it really, really well with lots of innovation.
Thank you very much. Ellie, it's been a fast and furious kind of panel today, bit of a marathon that we've been kind of going through. It's a marathon of sprints. What are your thoughts on today's session?
Yeah, it has indeed, Nick. I thought it was really good, especially great to be able to respond to the live viewers' questions as they come in, and really help them with their questions that are coming up as they're watching the rest of the panel. So really enjoyed it, and thanks everybody.
Okay, well, look, very good. Great job, everybody on the panel. We're going to move forward now and look and see what's coming up next on Level Up. Next Monday, we have the early show is kind of all about thinking about our online learning and thinking about collaboration in a different context. So this is really about tools and techniques that you can use inside virtual classrooms. So that's going to be happening kind of first of all. Later on the same day, on the 8th, we are back into the world of project and change management. But this time we're going to be looking at the role of the program manager. All right. And the role of the program manager really about thinking about how do you manage your time across that group of projects at scope and scale in order to be able to deliver the desired outcomes for the sponsoring organisation. So really, really good. We, as ever, are keen to hear from you and get your input to the show. Remember, it is you who actually set the agenda and drive these sessions. So look at the QR code on the screen, just click on that, subscribe to the show, and we'll send you a personal summary each week of what's coming up, how you can join us here on the panel, and how you can level up your career with APMG. Thanks very much, everybody, and we'll see you on the next show.